Hi everyone, welcome to this session on artificial neural networks. I am really excited to have you all here. My name is Amit and I will walk you through the core concepts behind artificial neural networks. To give a brief background about myself, I have over 23 years of work experience in data science, advanced analytics, big data and AI. I have worked with large companies such as Oracle, Samsung, Tech Mahindra and TCS. I worked on numerous data science and advanced analytics projects in my career, spanning multiple technologies such as SAS, Python, R, SPSS and MATLAB. Deep learning, or what we call as neural networks, are increasingly finding their way into projects, and we will learn why and how. In this session, we will talk about the concepts behind artificial neural networks. But before we go there, let us first focus on the image that is present in this video. This is a pictorial representation of the human brain cell. Here you can see that there is a cell. This is the central part of the cell. This cell has multiple branches and which in turn are connected to the other cells. These connections, the tree-like structures, are called as dendrites. And these bright lights that you can see in this image are electrical signals that are passing from one cell to the other. This is called a natural neural network or a biological neural network. Imagine the kind of processing capability our brain has, sometimes possibly better than the largest supercomputer, especially in the areas of object recognition, image detection, people, animals, all those kind of detection by our brain. And you can imagine the scale and power of the computing that is available in our brain. It's available in such a small space. Whereas if you see some of these large supercomputers, they fill up entire buildings, maybe more than a building. So what we say in the computer science terminology is that the computers are used to simulate the biological neural networks, and these simulations are called as artificial neural networks. Since this is related to artificial intelligence, hence note the keyword artificial. This is important. In this short session, we will not dwell too much on the mathematics, including matrix operations, calculus and linear algebra. Our focus is on applying deep learning to solve a business problem. The way this session is structured is that first we will understand what are the neural networks or other artificial neural networks and their applications. Then we do a deep dive into understanding neural network architectures and how does a neural network learn from data. Finally, we are going to apply this knowledge on solving a business problem. And without much further ado, let's move to the next session. So now let us look at some of the learning objectives that we aim to achieve as part of this particular session. These are the key concepts and techniques that you should be able to master after going through this session. The first learning objective is to understand and master the key concepts behind neural network. You should be able to explain what is a neural network and what are the various applications where a neural network can be used to solve a business problem. The second learning objective is to understand the basic architecture of neural networks. This includes topics such as layers, activation functions, backward and forward propagation, gradient descent and others. The third learning objective is to understand the optimization concepts and understand how gradient descent can be used to optimize the neural network. And lastly, you should be able to use TensorFlow library and the Keras API to build and train the neural networks. This seems a lot of work, but don't worry, all of this will come naturally as you do more and more practice, and we will also do a demonstration at the end. So finally, what I'm going to demonstrate to you is how you can solve a customer churn prediction problem using deep learning or neural networks. We will use TensorFlow library and the Keras API to build the model that will predict whether a customer is likely to churn. Now what churn essentially means is that whether the customer is likely to stop business with a company and move over to competition. As an example, let's say you buy a lot of goods from Flipkart and now you decide to try at Amazon or vice versa. This constitutes as churn for the company, which is either Flipkart or Amazon, and every company is interested in identifying which customers are likely to churn. What they can essentially do is they can proactively take actions to hold the customer back, as you know, the acquiring a new customer is very expensive. I know of some companies who spend upwards of $100 million to acquire and retain their customers. So what we are going to do is, in the next slide, we are going to look at some of the prerequisites that you need to be aware of, or you need to have the knowledge before we go into this particular session. So let us look at some of the prerequisites that you should know before you start this course. They are not too many, but at least it helps if you have some knowledge in these areas. So you are well aware of the Python programming language, and your skill level is intermediate if not expert in Python. We are going to conduct all our demonstrations in Python using TensorFlow and Keras library. If you have never worked on Python programming language, or you just have the very basic skills behind Python programming language, then probably you should improve your skills in Python and then come to this particular session. You are well aware of various Python data processing and numerical computation libraries such as Pandas and NumPy. We use Pandas to read dataset and NumPy to do mathematical operations on the dataset. If you don't have any knowledge on Pandas and NumPy, or if you have not even heard of Pandas and NumPy, then you should probably go back and learn these libraries before coming to this particular session. These are hard prerequisites which you must have before you even start working on neural networks. You are also well aware of Python IDE such as Jupyter. We are going to use Jupyter IDE for this particular demonstration. There are various other IDEs such as PyCharm or Spider. You can use either one of them. I use Jupyter because I find it very convenient. You have at least heard about TensorFlow. Now, if you've not heard of TensorFlow as such, then probably it's going to be a little bit difficult for you, but we will work it out. You also have a working computer connected to internet and have a Google account. Why I'm saying this is because we are going to use Google Colaboratory to build and train our neural network model. Google Colaboratory is a free service available to build and train models. It also provides computing resources such as GPUs and TPUs. And for large neural networks, to train them on a simple CPU is a little bit challenging. It takes a lot of time, and GPUs are best. So Google Colaboratory provides some capability, some computing resources around GPU, and we are going to use that. Yes, Google Colaboratory is going to be our tool for computing, and we will use the GPU capability available in Google Colaboratory. So with this, I hope you have you meet almost all the prerequisites. At least the first and the second one is mandatory. The last two are you need to have them because otherwise you won't be able to practice. If you have a very powerful computer with good RAM and good CPU, then probably you can still work out the example on your laptop or desktop, but it is better to use Google Collaboratory. So we will meet you in the next session. So now let us come to the first section of this particular session, which is what is an artificial neural network. Here we are going to talk about the various concepts behind artificial neural networks and their applications. So first of all, let us define what is an artificial neural network. And this is a very simplified definition of an artificial neural network. I already explained the term artificial and neural network to you earlier. Now this is formalized into a definition taken from Wikipedia. Artificial neural networks, or short form as ANNs, are computing systems inspired by the biological neural networks that constitute the human brains. It is important to note that artificial neural networks are computing systems, which means they are a computer program running on a server or a computing machine. The inspiration behind artificial neural network, as I had mentioned earlier as well, is the biological neural network, and this is the same biological neural network that is inside our brains. So you can also say that our brain is also like a supercomputer, but at a much smaller scale and biological in nature as compared to silicon based systems. And imagine the kind of storage computing power we have in our brains: storage, memory, CPU. And to power all this, body generates so much of energy to run all the programs that are running inside our brain, if I may call it. You would have also seen that you feel very tired after working on a difficult mathematical problem or writing a complex computer program, something which makes you use your brains. This is because the body has only so much capacity to generate energy that it can sustain the neural network inside our brain, for so much of time only. You have to stop, do something else as a distraction, watch a movie, read a book, etc., so that the body can regenerate energy and you can go back to doing your work. Now if I compare this to the artificial neural network, artificial neural networks are also complex computing systems. They need good storage capability, they need good computing power, and they also need the energy to be able to run the complex computations that happen in a neural network. This definition has been taken from Wikipedia, and you can read the article where it is in depth explained on neural networks. But I think for this particular session, let us move to the next slide, which is where is neural network used, or what are the business applications where a neural network finds its way. So let us look at the first application. Has anyone seen the video of a robotic dog patrolling or monitoring the sheep, or as a watchdog as compared to real dog? If you have not seen that, just go search on the internet or YouTube. The dog uses special kind of learning called deep reinforcement learning, which essentially has a neural network at its core. This guardian dog can perform most of the actions that a normal dog can do. It is efficient, it is effective, and it can do every function including flipping back, jumping up and down, because the way it has been computed, and it has learned everything over a period of time, like any biological dog would do. As a second example, we hear about Tesla, right? The self-driving car. This again uses deep reinforcement learning. Imagine a car without a driver and is able to take you to your destination. The deep learning program inside the car evaluates various inputs such as traffic signals, surrounding area, obstacles, GPS, maps, and so much of data, so as to make a decision if it should move forward or stop the car, probably detecting an obstacle and a possible accident. Do you have Netflix? If you have, then you would have seen movies being recommended to you, and you would be so surprised that out of the hundreds of thousands of movies, Netflix is able to recommend the movies that you definitely like. This is another application of deep learning for a recommender system. Have you ever booked a flight ticket, or have you ever booked a hotel? If you have, you would have probably gone to a site like travel.com or makemytrip.com for pricing hotels for your trip. This is called as a dynamic pricing engine, which kind of recommends a pricing for you which is optimal and which looks attractive for you to book the hotel. This is another example where neural networks come into play. And finally, when you go to Amazon, this is what you see. Customers who viewed this item also viewed this. This is another recommended system or a neural network that is trying to maximize the sale by recommending better products to you, or maybe so that you actually buy the product and not just close the web page. So the bottom line is neural networks are everywhere. Alexa, Siri, these are other examples of deep learning and neural network applications, although they are a different kind of category of neural networks. So with this session, I hope you understand that neural networks are present everywhere. They find an application in almost every business application that we have, and it's everywhere basically. Nowadays everybody has started using deep learning neural networks to solve complex business problems. So we'll go to the next session in a few seconds. So now we have a biological neural network which is inside our brain, and we also have an artificial neural network that is running on a computer. So what if both of them compete against each other, man versus machine? We have numerous such instances where the best human mind in a particular game competed against the computer and lost. The first such instance was Garry Kasparov, who lost to IBM Deep Blue in chess. While Deep Blue was not a pure AI kind of a system, but then it had significant capabilities and was able to beat the grandmaster in chess. What also happened is, in a few games, Garry Kasparov was also able to beat Deep Blue, and in some cases Deep Blue was able to beat Garry Kasparov as well. But a major breakthrough came when AlphaGo defeated the world champion Lee Sedol 4:1 in a game of Go. Go is a Chinese board game which requires players to build a strategy to acquire as much territory as possible on the board. DeepMind, which is now acquired by Google, developed AlphaGo. Lee Sedol is the world's best human player in Go. He lost to AlphaGo. AlphaGo and its successors used a Monte Carlo tree search algorithm to find its moves based on knowledge previously acquired by machine learning, especially by an artificial neural network, by extensive training, both from human and computer play. A neural network is trained to identify the best moves and the winning percentage of these moves. This neural network improves the strength of the tree search, resulting in stronger move selection in the next iteration. So Lee Sedol lost to AlphaGo Zero in 2016. Finally, DeepMind developed AlphaGo Zero, which uses deep reinforcement learning. It's a self-learning program that is only told about the rules of the game. It learns itself by identifying moves which nobody has even thought of actually. After playing with itself as an opponent for 3 days, that's how it was able to learn. It was able to defeat the AlphaGo program that beat Lee Sedol 100:0. With the rise in computing power and advances in deep learning neural networks, machines are able to beat humans in common games. While this may sound ominous, this has multiple applications in various fields, such as cancer research. Very recently, DeepMind released an algorithm called as AlphaFold, which is able to predict the folding of human proteins, thereby solving a problem that biologists have been trying to solve for multiple decades. So why are neural networks gaining importance now? Neural networks were invented way back in 1959, but they are gaining importance now, and the reasons are very simple. First, the data that is generated every year is growing exponentially. It is estimated that in 2024, the data will reach 150 zettabytes. That is a lot of data. Unfortunately, we now have the capability to store and process such data thanks to miniaturization of computers and the storage medium. Earlier in 1959, we did not have enough resources, enough computing capabilities, even enough storage to store such large volumes of data. Now we have them, and that's why neural networks are gaining importance. So the second reason is that apart from CPUs, NVIDIA and others developed the GPU with a dedicated RAM and high computing power. This enabled availability of high computing in a smaller size necessary to train a neural network. The third is cloud providers such as AWS, Azure and Google have enabled infrastructure that is virtually infinite, leading to immense computing capabilities at a fraction of cost earlier. Most cloud providers provide these capabilities on a pay-as-you-use basis, which means that if you have a huge neural network to train, you probably don't need too much of money to run a neural network, because Amazon or Azure or Google provide the cloud capabilities to be able to run such neural networks. So with the combination of all the above three, neural networks are finding applications in solving business problems. As more and more data is made available, improved computing capabilities are available, neural networks are also improving and finding more importance and acceptance in solving business problems. So now that we have looked at what are neural networks, what are their applications, why they are gaining importance, let us go a little bit more detailed into the neural network architecture. So before we go there, let us try to again go back to the basic principle about the human or a biological neuron. So what you see is a picture of a biological neuron or a human neuron, and we have a cell body called a neuron. It's also known as soma. Soma is where the signals from the dendrites, which you see these tree structures, are collected, evaluated, processed, and then these are passed on. The soma or the neuron or the nucleus does not play an active role in the transmission of the neural signal. It is meant only for computation. It is the dendrites or the axons who are responsible for passing these signals or the computation to further cells. The neuron is the heart of the brain cell, where complex calculations happen and finally a decision is made. The information to the cell is provided through the dendrites through electrical impulses or signals. Axons pass messages away from the cell bodies to other neurons or muscles or glands. So if you see dendrites receive, this end of the dendrites receive the information from other cell. It's processed inside a neuron, passed through the axon, and these are again the dendrites which are connected to a similar cell, and they pass on the signal or the input. This is how the basic human neuron work, and we will look at how this particular neuron, or how do we kind of identify or classify an object. So how do we see an object? Let's say this is you and this is the object, which is an elephant. When the light falls on an object, it is reflected on the object and it goes through the lens in our eye. This image is formed inside the brain. The image is stored and processed. Actually, it is an inverted image formed by the lens, and the image is transformed to revert it back to its normal image. Now, what the biological neuron inside the brain classifies this image as that of an elephant, and it says that okay, what you see is an object is an elephant. From childhood, through millions of such images which the child learns, the brain actually learns to classify different objects. It could be people, it could be objects, it could be animals, it could be buildings, etc. It's again remarkable to see how much our brain can store information and use this information to process and train the neural network. So now we understand how object detection, making guesses, ability to think is all controlled through a biological neuron. Now we'll look at how an artificial neural network is structured and how it can be trained to perform similar function, sometimes maybe better than the human brain itself. Now let us look at a visual representation of a simplified artificial neural network. So the neural network receives data through a layer known as the input layer. This layer comprises of multiple neurons whose job is to just receive input. Each neuron can receive one variable or feature from a data set. This could be either a continuous variable or a discrete variable. Here each neuron, this number 1, number 2 and number 3 in green color, represents a feature from the feature vector that we have in our data set. Now the core of the neural network is the hidden layer. In this case, we have just taken one single hidden layer which has 4 neurons. The A, B and C and D in light blue color are the hidden neurons, or neurons in the hidden layer. You can have as many hidden layers in the neural network and as well as many neurons in each layer as you like. Now for each neuron in the input layer, we connect it to every neuron in the hidden layer. If you compare this to a biological representation, these connections are nothing but dendrites. Every hidden layer is connected now to the output layer. So you have just one output layer, and each output layer has a number of neurons equal to the number of outcomes you expect. If it is a binary problem that you are trying to solve, then you have one output and the value is a probability converted to 0 or 1. If it is a continuous variable, then also it is one neuron. Say you are predicting the price of a house or price of a stock or any other continuous variable. If your outcome has more than one value, say you are classifying each image as a number from 0 to 9, then the number of neurons are the same as the number of outputs, which is 10 here. So to summarize, this is how an artificial neural network is structured. There is an input layer, one or many hidden layers, and one output layer. The number of neurons in an input layer are the same as number of feature vectors, plus we also have a bias neuron that we will talk about later. Each hidden layer can have as many neurons as you want, but be mindful that the more the number of neurons, the more the complexity of model and the more time it will take to train the model. The output layer is a single layer with the number of neurons depending on the type of the problem, which is either classification or regression. Now let us delve a little bit more detail on how the neurons work and how do they function. By the way, you can also look at neurons A, B, C and D as new features that have been detected by neural network, which we typically call as feature engineering. Now we look into more details on how the neurons function. Let's say our data set has three features, x1, x2 and x3. Now all these features are connected to the neuron A from the hidden layer, and which is then connected to the output y hat. Please note that y hat is the predicted value from the neural network, and it depends on what you are trying to solve, whether it's a classification or a regression problem. So for each connection from the input variable to the hidden layer neuron, we compute weights W1, W2 and W3. We also add another input variable which is called bias, whose weight is 1. For the time period, let us just assume that bias is equivalent of the epsilon that we are used to seeing as error term in the regression models. Weight for each individual variable is multiplied by the value, and the neuron A totals each such computation. So at neuron A, it becomes W1 into x1 plus W2 into x2 plus W3 into x3. Now on top of this addition, the neuron applies an activation function. An activation function is a transformation function which defines what the prediction will be. Some of the activation functions you already know. For example, sigmoid function, which is used in logistic regression for classification problems. There are many such others and we will discuss them a little bit later. Finally, y hat is computed, and an equation after applying the activation function, it gives an outcome. By its very name, activation function decides if the neuron fires or not. In a binary classification case, it decides it is 0 or 1. So if you look at this particular equation, this is W1 into x1 plus W2 into x2 plus W3 into x3 plus bias into 1, and then you have applied an activation function. So this is how computation within a neuron happens. Activation function is key to this computation because it decides whether a neuron fires or not, and we will look at how. So this is a very drill down view into how neurons do computations. We will also come later on in this particular session. We will also learn how does a neural network learn from data. This is how a neuron does the computation. If we consider neural networks as a pot making dish, then activation function is something of a mysterious ingredient added to the input ingredients already bubbling in the neuron spot. The activation function is the process or a method applied to the weighted input value once it enters the neuron. So let us look at some of the activation functions that are available. So the first and the most simple activation function is the threshold function. The x-axis on this threshold function graph represents the weighted sum of inputs. On the y-axis are the values from 0 to 1. If the weighted sum is valued as less than 0, then the threshold function will identify it as 0. If the value is equal to or more than 0, then the threshold function passes on 1. In mathematical terminology, this is also known as a step function. The next function, which is very familiar to you, or should be very familiar to you, is the sigmoid function. With the sigmoid, anything below 0 drops off and everything above 0 is valued as 1. If we consider the threshold function as a rigid function, the sigmoid's curvature means it is far better suited to probabilities when applied at the output layer of your neural network. If the threshold tells you the difference between 0 and $1, then the sigmoid gives you that as well for every cent in between. The one that we have next is one of the most popular functions applied in neural networking today worldwide. This is called the rectified linear unit or ReLU. If the weighted value is below 0, then it takes 0, else it gives the value of the weighted sum of the features. In some cases you will find that ReLU works better, in some cases you will find threshold function works better, in some cases you will find sigmoid function is better. And now the tanh, which is kind of a brother of sigmoid. It is a curved function but swings between -1 and 1. So there are many such other activation functions such as leaky ReLU, softmax, etc. However, the ones above are mostly used when we design a neural network. Now we have come to the most important part of our neural network session, and luckily you don't have to write this yourself. This is called the gradient descent. Libraries such as TensorFlow do this automatically for you. However, you must understand what goes behind a gradient descent computation. So once the neural network makes its prediction, it computes something called as a cost function, which is defined as half of the difference between square of the difference between the predicted value and the actual value. The reason why it is divided for 2 is because it is easier for computation and when calculus or differential calculus is applied on the cost function. Cost function defines what is the error that the neural network is making, and the optimization of the neural network is done by minimizing the cost function, which means we are minimizing the error that neural network is making. So in this plot, if we put y hat on the x-axis, which is the predicted value on the y-axis, and for every y hat we plot the cost function on the y-axis, we get a parabolic curve, which is primarily because we are taking square of the differences, and this is how the parabolic curve looks like. The minimum value of a function, parabolic function, is at the bottom, but the neural network does not know it as yet. So what we define is something called as a learning rate. So let's say the current position is where the neural network is, the cost function is, if you see this red ball or the red point, we are on the left side, which means that we are on the left of the minima, which is the bottom. So what we do is, learning rate defines the quantum of the step that neural networks needs to take to move to the minimum value. So let's take another example. Let's say you are standing on top of a mountain and you want to climb down, right? Because that is the minimum that you want to reach. So what would you do? You would look at how can I go down by navigating the easiest possible way. So learning rate is what defines the easiest possible way, and once you move down, that is when eventually you will reach the minima. The problem with learning rate is if it is too high, then what may happen is while coming down you may miss this minima and you may go up. So you have to again come back and start coming towards the minima. So by taking small steps, the cost function is able to optimize to its minimum value. And minimum value is where a minima, which we call it mathematically as the minima. Minima is where the error of the neural network is low and it is performing at its best. So with this is the cost function. This is your learning rate. So this is the concept behind gradient descent, and as I said earlier, you don't have to implement gradient descent when we are using TensorFlow. It is done automatically for you, making it a lot easier to design neural networks. You have to focus on optimizing the parameters of neural network, also called as hyperparameters. Learning rate is one such hyperparameter that needs to be defined very carefully. Otherwise, you may not be able to achieve the required solution to the problem at hand, and the neural network will keep on training itself, or it may not be able to converge at the minima. So up till now we have understood the following concepts. What is an input layer? What are hidden layers? What are neurons? What is an output layer? What is activation function? And we have also learned about what gradient descent is and how it is used for optimizing a neural network. So with so many such concepts, one can easily get confused and think about how does a neural network actually learn. So we will define it now. Let us take the neural network example that we had taken. 3 input variables and 1 binary output variable. It's a classification problem. 3 input features in the data set and 1 output, which is either 0 or 1. So what happens is, and we also understand that each connection between neurons is quantified via weight, which is a number, numerical number. So what happens at the first step is the weights are initialized randomly. You can either let the weight initialization to be chosen by TensorFlow, or there are sophisticated methods to choosing how the weights are initialized. This has a significant impact on the neural network outcome and must be considered. I have seen many times that the performance of a neural network can be simply boosted by considering how do we initialize the weights. TensorFlow provides multiple such ways to define weights, and we will see that later in the demo. Then what happens is, in this hidden layer we compute the first set of numbers, that initialized weights into value is summed up, activation function applied, and the ABCD values are calculated. This is also called as a forward pass or a forward propagation. The input variables and the initialized weights are together computed as sum of product of weights and input variables. On this sum, the activation function is applied to get the values of A, B, C and D. Next we compute the weights from A, B, C and D to the output and make a prediction known as y hat. Once we have made a prediction, what we do is we compute the loss by using the cost function that we saw earlier. We minimize the cost function using the gradient descent algorithm and recompute the weights from output layer back to the weights which were connecting from the output layer to the hidden neurons. Remember, and then what we also do is, once these weights are updated, then we also update the weights on the connections between the input layer and the neurons. Remember that we have initialized the weights, we have computed the hidden layer and made predictions on the forward pass. In the backward pass or the back propagation, we compute the loss and we subsequently update the weights at each individual connection. So this entire cycle is called an epoch, and we can train the neural network running multiple epochs. Thus, it is important to remember that initialization of weights is done at the first epoch, and in subsequent epochs the weights are updated based on the cost function. Once all the epochs are computed, we have a fully trained neural network and is ready for prediction. This appears a lot way complex and it is difficult to code it by hand. However, when we use TensorFlow or a PyTorch or any other deep learning library, it is made easier because there is an abstraction which is called as Keras API in TensorFlow, and we will use that to program a neural network. All of this will come very easily to you when you see the demonstration, and you can see each of these concepts that we have talked are being actually implemented using TensorFlow. So now we have learnt most of the concepts that are applicable from a deep learning or a neural network perspective. Now we come to our favorite library, which is TensorFlow. So what exactly is TensorFlow? TensorFlow is an open source library. Google had open sourced it and made it available for developers and data scientists to use it for their business applications. It is designed for large computations, and actually it is developed for running large computations on large data sets. The way it does its internal computation is through using graphs which have nodes and edges. Keras API is the API that has been created for all neural network design and training. Keras used to be a library earlier. In TensorFlow 2.0, Keras has been embedded into TensorFlow and made as the standard for designing neural networks. And what TensorFlow uses is or works on a concept of multi-dimensional arrays of higher dimensions called as tensors. We will not go much detail into each of these concepts, but we will try to get into programming a neural network now that all of these concepts are fresh in our mind. An interesting thing that I wanted to show to you is something called as a TensorFlow Playground. TensorFlow Playground is a browser-based demonstration tool provided by Google so that you can try your hand running a neural network. So let me go to the TensorFlow Playground. You can open it in your browser. If you see this, you have something called, you can define the learning rate, you can define the activation function. There are regularizations which you understand from machine learning L1 and L2, which you can also use. You can also use regularization rate. You can define what is the classification, whether it's a classification or regression problem. There are 4 data sets. You can also define what is the split you want in terms of train and test. Batch size you can define what is the batch. So batch size is defined as the bundling or bunching together of the number of records which are sent at a single time into the neural network for the training purpose. Now you have these 2 features, x1 and x2 in the data set. You have 2 hidden layers. We can add 1 more layer. We can add more neurons to each of these layers, and we can kind of reduce this final layer. These are hidden layers, and then there is an output layer. Now we can start running, and it's going to compute the output. You can run it to as many epochs as you want, and within the browser you can see that the neural network is training itself, and here you can see the test loss and the training loss that the neural network is able to achieve. And here you can see the output actually is trying to classify, and that is what you can try out your hand on TensorFlow in the browser. So finally we come to the demonstration, which is predicting customer churn, as we had promised earlier in the course that this is a demo we are going to run. So let us go through the business problem that we have at hand. So let's say you are a recent addition to the data science team, which is responsible for marketing and campaigns with a large telecom operator. John, your manager, tells you that the business is worried customers are likely to move over to competition due to competitive new offerings from our competition. While the current customer base is stable and has been with the company for a very long time, the business would want to proactively identify customers who are going to leave. The other data scientists have used traditional methods such as logistic regression, decision tree, random forest. You are asked to apply your knowledge in deep learning to predict customer churn. You are given a training set and have been told that a model with over 80% accuracy on the test set will be accepted, as other models have not been able to achieve 80%. So if you look at this, you are put into a real life situation where business is worried that customers are likely to move. The current customer base is stable, but you have to proactively identify customers who are going to leave and move over to competition. You are expected to apply your knowledge in deep learning, and your target is to meet 80% accuracy on the test set. You will be given data. You are given data on the training set and the test set. There are about 5,000 records, and training set is about 80% of the total data set, which is 4,000 records. Test set is about 1,000 records, and you have to achieve 80% accuracy on the test. So now we will move to Google Colaboratory, and I will show you how the neural network is designed using TensorFlow. So now we head over to Google Colaboratory. You can access Colaboratory by visiting this URL, collab.research.google.com. You will have, it will ask you for a sign on, and you can log in through your Google account. Make sure you have enough space in your Google Drive, otherwise files and notebooks will not be saved. Google Colaboratory uses a similar interface as Jupyter Notebook. It uses the IPYNB format of storing the files. What I have done is, I have allocated, I am using a GPU actually. So we go into resources, change runtime. We can allocate a CPU which is none, GPU or TPU. These are not very highly powerful machines that are resources that are allocated to you, but still it is better than running on a simple CPU. So I have allocated the resource to my notebook, and this is what you should do, also do the same. In my Google Drive, I have created a folder called as Kaggle, because this data is coming from Kaggle. And within this data set, I have the training data set and the testing data set. Both are uploaded on the Google Drive. From my Google Colaboratory, I can directly connect to my Google Drive. So how do you connect to the Google Drive? You call this function from google.colab import drive, and then you mount the Google Drive. So this will ask you for a token, and that token can be generated by clicking on a URL that Colaboratory gives you. Once you run this command, you sign in, get the token and enter it over here. Since this requires a password, I have skipped over those steps. But now if you see this, my Google Drive is mounted and is ready for is readily available to Colaboratory for training my models and getting the data from my Google Drive. So first what we do, we import the libraries that are needed to read and manipulate the data sets. So these are the two standard libraries, Python and NumPy. We run the cell and these libraries are imported. Now what we do is, we read the training data set and look at the first 5 rows of the data set. So we go to this path, content/gdrive/mydrive/kaggle/customer churn. Training data is the name of our file. I have rewritten the command because otherwise it takes a lot of time to write the code. So we read the data set and we see that there are multiple features in this data set. So the first is an ID, which is customer ID. We also have a state, which is OH, NJ, Oklahoma, Massachusetts. These are US states. Account length tells the duration in months for how long the customer has been with the company. This is a telecom operator, and account length is the nature of the duration of the relationship that the customer has with the telecom company. The next is area code. Area code is codified. We don't know the actual area code, what it means, but this has been anonymized for us in the data set. The field international plan is a categorical field which says yes or no, whether the customer is on an international roaming plan or not. Does the customer also have a voicemail plan is given by this particular feature. The number of voicemail messages that the customer has received in the last 3 months, these are the total voicemail customers. The total day minutes, total day calls, total day tasks. So these are 3 attributes or features that will tell you how many total day minutes that the customer has stopped, how many total day calls that the customer has made, and what is the amount on a daily charge that the customer has paid over a month or 3 months, whatever the duration is. Then in the evening, same features: total number of evening minutes, total number of evening calls, total charge that the customer has paid in the evening calls, for the evening calls. Similar case for nights, and then international minutes if the customer has made international calls. This data tells what is the number of service calls that the customer has made to the call center, and this is again a numerical variable. Churn is our target variable, which is either yes or no. No indicates that the customer is still with the business. Yes indicates that the customer has left. So this is our training set, and we will go to the test set. We'll do similar stuff with the test set as well. We just run the test set, and we also get this command, and we get the data in our test set. It has same features. We also have churn, whether yes or no, for this test set. Now we have the data. We have also seen that whether the customer, what are the fields that are available. Now what we can do is we can check if the customer has, if the data sets have any missing variables, right? So we have the train df dot is any dot sum. This command tells me if the training df, any of the field has null values. None of it has it in the training set. We can do the same in the test set as well. So we can say test underscore df dot is any dot sum, and this will also tell me that I do not have any null values in my So far what we have done is we have imported the libraries, we have connected to Google Drive in Collaboratory, and we have also read the data set into memory. We have checked if there are null values in our data set. So now we have read the data set, we have loaded the library, and we'll come to the next step of feature engineering. What we are going to do is we are going to create certain features based on the existing columns. So what we do is we calculate the average length of a call during the daytime, evenings, nighttime, and international call. First we do is we check if the data set is having any zero values, because we don't want to reach a situation where it is divided by 0. We calculate the average daily call length, average evening call length, average night call length, and average international call length for the training set. The next feature that we compute is we compute what is the average daily charge for daytime, evening, nighttime, and international calls. We again check for 0, and if it is greater than 0 we just add 1, so that we avoid the divide by 0 condition. So we have created these two sets of features in the training set. We run the same thing on the test set as well. So let us run the code. We run this particular code. It should create these features in the test set. We come to the second set of feature engineering and the training set, and my apologies, and then we will run it on the test set as well. So now once we have created these features, we are going to drop the columns that are not really needed. ID is a column which is not really needed. State is also another column which is not really needed. We drop all these original numerical columns because then since the other columns are a formula, we don't want to introduce any multicollinearity. So we remove the state, the customer ID, they are not really statistically significant, and drop the other columns as well. So let me run this particular code both on the training and the test set. So now we have dropped. So if I want to look at what is my training set looks like, I can say train underscore df dot head. It will show me the top 5 rows. And when I run it, it shows me now there is no more ID and state and all this. There is account length, international plan, yes or no, voicemail plan, yes or no, number of voicemail messages, number of customer service calls, and churn. And then these are our computed average values from a feature perspective. Now what we have to do is we have these 3 categorical variables, which is international plan, voicemail, and churn. Churn is our target variable. and we will do something called as a one-hot encoding. We will use the get dummies method on the international plan and the voicemail plan, and we will also apply we will say that churn is 0 if its value is no, and churn is 1 if the value is yes. So we apply these transformations, and then let's see what our data set looks like. This is how training data set looks like. There is okay, international plan yes 0 and 1, voicemail plan yes 0 and 1, and churn is our target variable. It was no, so it is 0. You see, it was no for the first time, it is 0. And we can again see what our test set also looks like. It should be identical in terms of the structure. So again, same account length. So we have done not only mapping but also done feature engineering, and we have also done our one-hot encoding for our categorical variables. Now what we do is we just create our xtrain and ytrain variables. We drop the churn and get the x values for the xtrain from the training data set, and ytrain is our churn column from the training data, similar to our test and test set as well. So we run this and we will get our xtrain and ytrain as arrays now. So now we have our xtrain, ytrain, xtest, ytest variables ready. But before we build a model, we need to scale the input data, as neural networks are highly sensitive to the scale of the variables. So what we do is we use the standard scaler from the scikit-learn library, which computes the z value for each variable in the data set. Z value is nothing but the value minus the mean divided by standard deviation. And a scikit-learn or sklearn library provides the standard scalar functions. So we call the standard scalar. We instantiate an object of the standard scalar class. We use the fit transform on the training data set, and we get a xtrain scaled variable, so which holds the fit. And so we do the fit, and then we do the transformation. So our xtrain scaled is the scaled down version of the scaled values from the xtrain data set. On the xtest data set, we don't do a fit transform, we just do the transform to use the mean and the standard deviation from the training data set, and we will get our scaled data. So we've reached a point that we have read our data set, we have done feature engineering, we have checked for null values, we have scaled our data set, and now it is the most interesting part, which is designing the neural network. So TensorFlow provides a class called as sequential. Sequential is the model that we use for building our neural network models. So if you remember, our model is sequential. There is an input layer followed by hidden layers and then the output layer. So we call the sequential class and we instantiate a object of the sequential class. Now the next step is to add a hidden layer to the neural network, right? So after input layer there is a hidden layer. In TensorFlow it is actually not necessary to define the input layer, though you can define it. The library is intelligent enough to detect that there is an input layer. The hidden layer is known as a dense layer in TensorFlow, as every neuron in the hidden layer is connected to every other neuron in the preceding layer and the next layer. Our first hidden layer has 512 neurons, uses the activation function ReLU, initializes the weights using the orthogonal method. You can look up orthogonal method on the TensorFlow documentation. And what we have to do is we have to provide the number of features in the data set. So basically the number of neurons in the input layer as input parameter. So we use tensorflow.keras.layer and import the dense layer, which is the hidden layer. We add this dense layer to our neural network model. We say okay, 512 units, activation is ReLU, input dimensions, which is the number of features that our xtrain scaled data set has, which is given by shape 1, Kernel initialization is orthogonal and bias initialization is 0. So we are saying bias is initialized as zeros, the x weights are initialized as orthogonal using the orthogonal method. So we have added this first input layer. Now what we are going to do is we are going to add subsequent layers. As we said earlier, we can have one or more hidden layers. We are going to add maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 additional layers in addition to the first layer. And the number of units on the number of neurons, we are going to keep dividing it by 2. This is not really necessary. You can add as many units as you want. However, in this case, I have seen we achieve good accuracy if the number of neurons keep coming down. So let us run this particular code. I have this first unit is 256, first layer has 256 neurons, the subsequent hidden layer has 128, the next one has 32, 16 and 8. And the activation function is value. So we've added all our hidden layers, and what actually remains is now to just add the output layer. So remember, this is a binary problem, predict 0 or 1. So the number of neurons, as we discussed in the lecture, is 1 and the activation is sigmoid. So we've added the sigmoid, the layer to this particular network, and our network design is complete. We can print the summary of the neural network layer, and you can see 512 is the first hidden layer, then 256, 128, 64, 32, 16, 8 and finally is 1 layer. So there are total about 182,401 variables that needs to be trained, which is a huge neural network. So now our neural network has been designed. The layers, input layer, hidden layer and the output layer has been designed. Now we have to also define what is the optimization function we are going to use, what is the loss function, and what are the metrics that we are going to monitor the performance of the neural network. So I am using optimizer called RMSProp. There are multiple other optimizers as well, such as Adam is there, SGD is there. I am using RMSProp because in this particular problem, RMSProp gives me better accuracy. I have done multiple times training this particular model and checked accuracy. RMSProp is the best one that I have seen so far. So if you look at when we define the optimizer, if you remember when we were talking about gradient descent, we said learning rate is one of the hyperparameters. So I have set it here, but I have kept it to default as 0.01. The loss is binary cross entropy, which is what we saw as the cost function of the loss function, and metrics we are going to measure as the accuracy. So let's run this particular code. And by the way, TensorFlow.keras.optimizer provides all the optimizer classes that you can probably use actually. So with this, our neural network is complete. It has been designed. The loss function, optimization function, metrics have been defined. Now with any other model in machine learning, we just fit it actually. So when we fit, we define the x and the y variables on which the neural network is trained. We define the batch size. We define the number of epochs. Remember, epochs is the number of cycles. And we also tell once the model is trained on the training set, what is it that it should use to validate the output. So the validation data we provide as x test and y test. Just remember that we are providing the scaled versions of the x test and the x trained data set and not the original one, because as we said earlier, neural network is heavily dependent on the scale. It is very sensitive. It can go haywire if you have not scaled it. So let us run the fit. I am using GPU, so it's going to be really fast. If it was CPU, then probably it will take some time for you. So let's run and we will see the epochs are being completed. Because I have a GPU, this is going really fast. So let's wait for maybe a minute or so, when by the time it is able to finish, train and test the model. So, it's going really very fast because of GPU. If you are running it on your personal laptop, and it does not have a GPU, or it is just having basic RAM and basic processor, you probably will find it as really slow. That's why I always prefer Google Collaborative. And with TensorFlow we have many other configurations that we can define. We can call back, we can do early stopping, saying that okay, if you achieve X accuracy, which is my threshold accuracy, in let's say 50 epochs, then you don't have to run for 100 epochs. I know my neural network is performing very well. So we've not used that, we could have always done it. Now the model is trained, model is ready to do prediction. So let's do the prediction by calling the predict function on the training and the test set. So it has predicted. Now what we do, we see what is the confusion matrix and what is the accuracy score. I am sure you would understand what is the confusion matrix. It's a simple actual versus predicted 2 by 2 or n by n matrix. Accuracy score is the actual minus predicted accuracy divided by the total, I mean not actual minus predicted, but it is actually how many customers who had actually churned were predicted as churn, and how many customers who did not churn were predicted as did not churn. So let us measure, see how good or bad the neural network has performed. We use the accuracy score, so it is 93.25%, which is approximately 93%. Sorry, 93.5% actually. And I also run the same for seeing what is my confusion matrix. So out of 4000 records, it has misclassified only 259 records, which is very good, decent accuracy. On the test set, which is our success criteria, if you remember, we have to achieve 80%. We have achieved more than 80%, it's almost 89%. And let's look at the confusion matrix. So confusion matrix, out of the 1000 records, it's probably about 111 records it's misclassifying, which is really very good number. So given the standards that were given, or given the acceptance criteria that was given to you in the business problem, the model has performed very well. It has been able to achieve 89% approximately, or 88.9% accuracy in the training, in the test set. Actually training set is a little bit higher in terms of 93.93%. So now we have reached the end. What we have seen is that our basic neural network with a few layers and training across multiple epochs is able to achieve an accuracy of 93% on training set and about 88-89% on the test set, which is not bad given that we have not tuned any hyperparameters. Keras provides something called as a Keras tuner, which can be used to tune the hyperparameters, but that is a topic for another discussion, for another tutorial. Now it is possible that regular algorithms such as logistic regression, decision trees might have given better accuracy with this data set, but imagine a data set which is really huge. You have millions of customers with millions of billing data, millions of records, then a neural network is more likely to give a better outcome. So with this we come to an end of the demonstration. Hope you understood the basic concept behind neural network. You learned the architecture of a neural network. You learned what is a hidden layer, what is a input layer, what is a hidden layer, what is an output layer, what are neurons, what are activation functions, what is gradient descent, and you also learned how do you build a model using TensorFlow. So this demo was aimed to reinforce the concepts taught in the class through the video, and I sincerely hope that I have been able to meet your expectations, and you should be able to program using Python and TensorFlow. With that, thank you so much for your time, and we will see you in the next session. Thank you.